Hey guys, Chris here with the Good Old Gamer. Today we're going to look at the big question. Can AMD overtake Nvidia? There's a few people out there that think that this is completely impossible, and there's other people that believe that Vega will be able to do this. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the information that's currently out there. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the information that's out there right now and gather it all together and just kind of see where the situation is currently and make an educated guess based upon all the information that is currently out there. This video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be on the desktop going through articles with you guys. All the links will be down in the description below. So if you guys want to go check these out yourself, I strongly suggest you do. I also strongly suggest that you find other sources to back these up, because a lot of this information I've seen elsewhere. I'm just choosing these sources because, well, honestly, these websites did a good job collecting the data and putting it into a nice form. But like I said, always double check your sources. But let's go ahead and let's check out and see what's going on out in the world. Okay, guys, so the first website I'm going to take you to is PCGamesN.com. The reason why I like this particular article by them, AMD RX Vega, release date, prices, specs, and all the rumors, is because this is a very good article that has all the information that's been released about Vega up until this point. And they also go ahead and put in the rumors that are out there flying around, but these aren't baseless rumors. These are rumors that are rooted in facts, and, you know, they make a lot of sense. Now, the article is by a gentleman by the name of Dave James. Now, I'm not super familiar with this website. I came across this a couple weeks ago, and it's just very well written. So I'm just going to go through some of the highlights with you guys. Let's take a look at Vega for what we know so far. And the way this article is written is it's pretty much a, you know, they start off with the basics, and, well, let's just jump right in, and I can kind of go over some of this with you. So this is the first bit of really concrete information that we received about Vega a few months ago. And let me just read from the article. AMD also announced the Vega GPU in their professional class Radeon Instinct's deep learning accelerators at the start of December 2016. The top-end Instinct card is the MI25, and this likely represents the fastest Vega can go right now. Now, I do agree with this. Obviously, AMD is going to put forth their most powerful GPU for the business sector. This is the same thing that Nvidia has done. Now, unlike with the Titan X and now the Titan XP in the consumer market, where Nvidia is taking advantage of people, in the business sector, the GP100 is the fastest chip that Nvidia can produce right now. So they are not screwing around with the business segment, and I don't believe AMD will as well. So I believe that to be very correct. Alright, this bit right here basically just says that Vega 10 should be launching in May. This is pretty much what we expect, potentially around Computex. This also makes a lot of sense because they said in the first half of 2017, the end of May is quite literally the end of the first half of 2017, and Computex makes a lot of sense. It's a large show, it's a big event, so that definitely seems to be true. Now, I'm not going to lie, this little bit right here kind of had me concerned with the always trustworthy WCCF Tech and their sources. That kind of had me a little worried about this particular website. However, like I said, I've double-checked everything that they've put in their article, and everything so far seems to have checked out. I don't know if they meant that sarcastically or not, but as we all know, WCCF Tech, sometimes they're right on, a lot of times they're not. It's kind of 50-50, so once again, always double-check your information. Alright, the next big piece of information is the redesigned geometry engine in Vega GPUs is promising much higher performance. It now has the capability to process more than twice as many polygons per cycle than we could in our previous generation. Okay, so basically what they're saying is they've doubled the IPC on this thing, which in theory is possible. If you look at Ryzen, AMD has really ramped it up in their efficiency. So is that possible? Absolutely. Until we see it in action, though, that's not really something that's provable. But at the very least, that gives you kind of an idea of what they're going for. They're looking to at least double their performance per stream processor. So They've been able to deliver on Ryzen. It would not surprise me if they were able to deliver with Vega as well. Now, this bit of information is obviously something that we will need to see in reality before we know how big of a deal this is. But as we all know, the high bandwidth cache and the high bandwidth controller, this is what's really, really kind of nice, where AMD can stream in data from your RAM or from your hard drive or pretty much anywhere else instead of having to cram everything into the frame buffer. Meaning the GPUs could probably get away with less VRAM and still operate the same. Now, like I said, without being able to see this in practice, who knows how well this is actually going to work out. But according to the article, and this was also mentioned in many other places, at the recent AMD Tech Summit in China, AMD showed off a demo of Deus Ex Mankind Divided running with the high bandwidth memory cache controller off in a side-by-side comparison. The GPU-intensive demo showing a 50% improvement in average frame rate and a 100% improvement in minimum frame rates. So clearly there are gains there to be had. Mankind Divided is a very GPU-intensive game. Most GPUs have a lot of trouble with that. And what's really interesting right there is a 50% improvement just by adding in the high bandwidth cache controller. So I decided, hey, let's go ahead and check something out real quick. So let's go over here to Techspot and just take a look at the RX 480. This is on their GTX 1080 Ti review because these are new benchmarks, so let's go ahead and use these. So just for the fun of it, let's say if the RX 480 were to have this high bandwidth memory cache controller, and okay, so let's just do a little math here real quick. So we're going to add 150%. There we go. So that would get us an average of 57 frames per second. So assuming that Vega has more architectural improvements over the RX 480, and if this is not just a gimmick, if this is an actual thing, 57% would be a little bit slower than a GTX 1080. And that's using RX 480 numbers. So if this happens to work out, that is huge right there, because let's say we double the efficiency on the instructions per clock, so that should, in theory, double your frame rate here, and then you add another 50% on top. That would be extremely, extremely impressive. Now, granted, you know, as we went over, things don't scale linearly like that, but it's also a new architecture with many other benefits, so let's go get back to that. One part I did kind of skip, you may have read it while I was going over the other bit, is that AMD is announcing a 4GB version of their RX Vega cards. And this is mostly due to their high bandwidth cache, because apparently you're not really going to need as much VRAM as you do on a traditional graphics card. And this statement couldn't be more true. It might well get complicated recommending minimum GPU memory capacities in the system setup for new games once RX Vega launches. Now, if the high bandwidth cache does what it's supposed to do, and you can get away with less RAM, this is really going to throw people off, because going to lower numbers is bad. Obviously, having an 8GB or bigger frame buffer would still be ideal, even for, you know, for 4K gaming and everything, but it would be extremely impressive to see how well they can do with just 4GB, considering the Fury X is still doing pretty well, even at 4K right now, and it doesn't have all these advanced features. Continuing on, the first Vega GPU, the RX Vega, will use the Vega 10 silicone and is likely to see AMD coming out with their high-end Halo graphics card first, and potentially an RX 500 branded version coming out later, the same way that the GTX 1080 Ti followed the Nvidia's Titan X. This card is likely to be AMD's Vega card that we've been seeing at the New Horizon event, rocking Star Wars Battlefront at 4K over 60 frames per second. This statement right here, I agree to be true. More than likely, the silicone that we've seen so far is the Vega that should be coming out in May. As I'm going to be going over here soon, there should be another Vega launch here the second half of 2017, and that's going to be basically the Titan version, the big version, the fully unlocked Vega. I shouldn't call it the Titan version anymore because we don't unlock Titans from the get-go, so it'd be the Vega XP. Yeah, that's what it is. Anyways, continuing on, I do agree with that, and I think most people would. Obviously, the card that they were showing off a few months ago would be the one that's about to come out at this point. Now, this part I find very interesting. This is basically what I believe the main difference between Nvidia GPUs and AMD GPUs have been for pretty much the past 4 or 5 years now. The new chip design allows more concurrency in processing non-uniform graphics workloads. Previous designs potentially left large chunks of silicon idle when the GPU was processing smaller operations, bottlenecking the graphics system. The new NCU design, though, is meant to allow parts of the GPU to work on smaller operations when there is spare capacity, meaning there shouldn't be as many wasted and idle parts of the chip. This should mean that more work gets done in the same amount of time as previous GPU designs. How much impact this will have on gaming workloads is difficult to say, but it could end up being important for lower-level APIs like DirectX 12 and Vulkan. In all honesty, I also believe that this would be very beneficial for DirectX 11. Obviously, if your GPU is not running idle, and when parts of it are busy, tangling smaller stuff, and the rest of the GPU finds other tasks to do, think of it like that guy at work who just sits around when he's not being told what to do. More things can get done when that guy's helping out and doing other stuff. It's basically the same thing. And I've seen this personally where AMD GPU's utilization will just suddenly drop. Meanwhile, Nvidia GPU utilization will remain high. So I think this is huge, and I think this will be extremely beneficial for AMD if it works as described here. Alrighty guys, so here they're basically going over the maximum performance of the Vega 10 14 nanometer GPU. This is what we've been talking about, the 4096 stream processors. That's pretty much what we've known for a while here, and that's what's going to be on the professional grade MI25 professional GPUs here. And they have 12 teraflops of performance, which is technically slightly ahead of the old Titan X and pretty much where the Titan XP is. Now, this is the Vega GPU that should be sporting the 16GB HBM2 and will try to stay below 300 watts. The MI25 was pegged at TDP of 250 watts, so that should be well below the 300 watts that they're saying here. Now, this is the GPU that they're expecting at the second half of 2017. This makes a lot of sense. They're going to come out with, the smaller Vega chip, which will probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 2560 cores. Obviously, they didn't speculate on that because there's no real information out there. It could have any number of cores. But in all honesty, from the way that this is being described, the Vega GPU that may be coming out first sounds more like the Vega 11. Maybe it's not. Maybe it'll have like 3560 cores, or kind of like the original Titan XP, or Titan X Pascal. But perhaps it's running much lower, and it could potentially actually be the Vega 11 coming out first. Personally, I think that actually makes a lot more sense because the Vega 10 is a large, very expensive chip, and it's going to sell for a lot of money to businesses at first. So the Vega GPU, the 4 and 8 gigabyte models that will be coming out here in May, to me almost sounds like it would be a smaller die just to begin with. Now, that may be incorrect. Maybe it is the same Vega 10 GPU. Maybe it's not. There's just not enough information out there right now to know for sure. Perhaps, like I said, maybe AMD's learning from Nvidia and they're taking advantage of the high-end market and those high margins there for a while, and then they'll eventually scale it down. I don't know. It does kind of sound that way from the way that this article describes. I know I'm kind of skipping through here a little bit for you guys, but please read the whole article. It's actually done very well, and things just kind of line up with the way that they wrote this. The other reason why I bring up Vega 11 is because they're pretty surprised that there's pretty much nothing going on. Nobody's talking about Vega 11, and a lot of people believe that's because they're coming out with, the 500, the RX 500 series, which is just Polaris. Now, granted, that may be the case, but personally, like I said, I think the first Vega GPUs that come out to the consumer market may actually be the Vega 11. We'll know once we see the CUDA core count and once somebody gets an actual sizing of the die there, pulls off a heatsink and we see exactly how big the chip is. We'll know for sure at that point. But it is entirely possible that that may be the case. Moving on from there, now we're getting pretty much into the rumor mill, and this is this is where things get fun, so I'm going to put it back up. Speculation time. Okay, so there have been rumors of the Vega 20. This has actually been out for a while now. I think for about 6 or 7 months. And they're working with Global Foundries. The Vega 20 is reportedly going to be based off of 7 nanometer process instead of 10, which I think was originally planned to be 10, but Global Foundries just scrapped 10. They're jumping straight to 7. And releasing in 2018 with up to 32 gigabytes of HBM2 with a speed of 1 terabyte per second speeds, which is ridiculous. Oh, not to mention 150 watt TDP. Now this would be sporting the same 64 NCU cores as the big Vega that they're talking about up here, which is 4096 stream processors in total. And jumping down to a 150 watt TDP is not unfeasible, considering it's basically the same thing that they're doing on 14 nanometers at 250 to 300 watts. So you shrink the die in half, you can pretty much cut down your TDP by about half. That, in theory, is very, very possible. The big question is can Global Foundries actually hit the 7 nanometers in 2018? It seems like I'm not the only one that thinks that that's a bit of wishful thinking. Possibly early 2019, but then that'll push back Navi. I mean, who knows what's really going to happen, but it would be pretty spectacular if they actually do it, which they go into right down here. If they do actually manage to pull off 7 nanometers, the Vega 20 are true, then AMD is going to be moving to a tick-tock cycle, kind of like Intel. Now, that would be really awesome if they're able to pull this off. It really kind of comes down to Global Foundries, and as we know, their track record is not exactly stellar. But the big thing is with AMD ramping up and becoming more profitable, they're going to be more profitable. And the more profitable that Global Foundries is, obviously the faster their processes can come out. So it's kind of you scratch my back, I scratch your situation. So it not only comes down to Vega and how well that does, but this guy right here is a big, big factor in that. So I've been talking a pretty good bit about like Vega and the information that's out there and a little bit of speculation. And it definitely seems like it's going to be a very powerful chip, especially if it delivers on everything that we've kind of been told. And the reason why I believe that this is probably true isn't so much because of the website that I'm reading it off of. It's because this is being told to us by AMD in small increments here and there. They just kind of collected it all together for you guys. But the big thing is the Polaris GPUs performed exactly as fast as AMD predicted. They did exactly what they were meant to do. You can go ahead and check out our impressions of the RX 480 when that launched, and we were very happy because it did exactly what it was supposed to. Ryzen, the exact same thing. The only thing with Ryzen is a little funky on the gaming, and much like the first generation Core i7s and everything, Ryzen's having a little bit of growing pains, but it's actually extremely, extremely powerful and a super, super value, and in all honesty, does exactly what AMD said that it would do. So they've delivered both on Polaris and Zen within a year. So I'm likely to believe that they're not going to be yanking our chain again. Right now, the track record's good, so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. But I did kind of touch on something there when I said Global Foundries and AMD and how their fates are kind of intertwined. Obviously, you know, the better that AMD does, the better that Global Foundries is going to do. But this video is about AMD versus Nvidia, and can they ever retake the throne? And I wanted to look something up real quick and just see exactly what kind of battle Nvidia really has for them. Now, I think it's still going to take AMD a few years because they've been losing market share for so long that they just don't have enough capital for R&D like Nvidia does. And obviously with Nvidia still sitting on the GP100 chip, which could just crush the Titan XP, and then they can come out with the Titan XPP, or the Titan Vista, or the Titan 7, or whatever they feel like calling it. And so even if Vega does happen to beat the Titan X, or the Titan XP, they can still come out with a faster GPU. So can AMD beat Nvidia knowing that they can come out with an even faster card if they really needed to? I don't think it's possible right now. But let's take a look at some numbers that do show some promising things for the future. Okay guys, so we're looking at Nvidia's fiscal earnings for 2016. Okay, so this is all the money that they made in 2016. So for the fourth quarter, they did $2.17 billion, which is insane. This is their record quarter revenue, and 2016 was their record year in revenue of $6.91 billion. This is up 38% from the year previous and up 55% for Q4 2016 over Q4 2015. That is pretty damn high, with a gross margin percent of 60%. That means when Nvidia sells a GPU to a company like, let's say Asus or EVGA, EVGA slaps it onto a PCB, puts RAM in there, adds a cooler, then they mark it up and sell it to like Newegg, and then Newegg goes ahead and marks it up and sells it to you for $700-800. That means Nvidia is still getting 60% off of what they originally sell these things for. I know I tell you guys all the time that CPUs and GPUs don't really cost that much to produce. It's all in R&D. And right there, that's the proof. Almost no businesses have a 60% margin. Not from the manufacturing side. On the retail side, some businesses do, but that's pretty ridiculous right there. Regardless, $6.91 billion, that's the number I want you to look at. That's the most money that Nvidia has ever made. And considering Nvidia held about 90% of the market share, that means there's only 10% extra out there. So that means the total GPU market was somewhere around, let's just round up, about $7.5 billion, okay? So that's the entire GPU market. I may have said CPU before, but I meant GPU. $7.5 billion approximately, okay? Now, let's take a look at Intel. This is what Intel did last year. They did about $60 billion. Okay, we're going to use our trusty calculator here again. And we're going to do, all right, 7.5 divided by 60. Okay, which means 12.5% of what Intel did. So, Nvidia's best year, which this is also Intel's best year. Okay, so we're having best year versus best year. But they've only done 12.5% of what Intel has done. Okay, guys, so what this means is that the CPU market is where the real money is made. It's not in the GPU market. The best year ever from Nvidia versus the best year ever from Intel, and we're looking at only 12.5%, which means if AMD can take away 10% of Intel's market, let's say their total global market, which seems very likely, especially on the server side, they may be able to take a hell of a lot more if their pricing's competitive enough, but let's just say they take 10% away from Intel. That alone covers the gap between Nvidia and AMD. That covers all the financial gap right there. AMD's way to beat Nvidia is with Ryzen. The revenues from Ryzen can offset Nvidia's lead in the market right now. Now, AMD's not going to burn all their Ryzen profits on, their GPU division, but that is going to mean that the company's going to have a lot more money just sitting around for R&D. Now, the CPU division and the GPU division do tie together with APUs, so it is in AMD's best interest to make sure that their GPU technology keeps growing alongside with their CPU division. So they will invest some of their Ryzen earnings into Vega or Navi, into their GPU division, plain and simple. So, yes, I do think that AMD can eventually catch up and exceed Nvidia. Can they catch up and exceed Intel? I don't think that's ever really going to happen unless Intel comes out with another Pentium 4. Or they just decide to quad cores are still good enough for the next 10 years. The only way that AMD is going to beat Intel is if Intel allows it. And honestly, they're doing a good job allowing AMD to catch up. Nvidia, on the other hand, almost has no way possible to beat AMD if their CPU division is competitive. If AMD takes 20% of the CPU market, Nvidia can never catch up. It's impossible. This is part of the reason why they're coming out with another Titan XP this year, is because Nvidia needs to recreate all those earnings that they did last year. If you work in any sort of business, every year your expectations go up. Meaning if last year was a record year, your shareholders and everybody, they don't care about that. It's like, oh, that was great, that's cool, but you have to do better this year. And that's the reason why they're milking their customers, because they don't have a new architecture. There is no new process node. Maxwell slash Pascal, which is the same architecture, and it's over 3 years old now. I mean, it's getting long in the tooth. There's only so far that they could stretch that. They do have the GP100, but that's probably a very expensive chip to make compared to the GP102 and definitely the GP104 chip. Yields are probably a lot lower. It has HBM2, which as we all know is pretty costly, and that eats into margins. Sometimes to keep shareholders happy, you have to keep revenues up and sacrifice margins, and Nvidia will do that if they have to. Now, I know I'm getting kind of technical and businessy here, and this is supposed to be a gaming channel, but this is information you kind of have to know if you really want to understand what's actually going on out there. But at the end of the day, if you really want to help out AMD, but you don't really like their graphics cards, buy an AMD CPU. In all honesty, that's going to help them out just as much, because that's the market that can really help level the playing field and reset everything. Now imagine if AMD never really lost all that CPU market share to Intel. There's no way that Nvidia would even be close right now. So it's kind of a good thing that everything happened this way, because we don't want AMD dominating the market either, because then they'll be doing the exact same thing that Nvidia is doing or that Intel is doing. We want healthy competition. So what's kind of nice is, you know, like I said, let's say Vega isn't that good. Let's say all that cool stuff I just talked about, it's a total flop and it doesn't work out. It doesn't really matter, because with all the revenues coming in from their CPU division, which we know is good, they're going to be just fine. And, you know, maybe it'll take a few years, a few revisions, you know, a few architectures to get their GPUs back on track and possibly more competitive. That's great. So no matter what, the market's going to go ahead and rebalance at some point. And I think Nvidia knows that that's going to happen, especially now that Ryzen is out and it's doing very well. So I think that they're trying to capitalize on the market as much as they can while they can. So I don't think that they're particularly afraid of Vega. I think they're really afraid of AMD as a company, is really what it comes down to. Well, alrighty guys, this is a different kind of video. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. If you like this kind of video, please hit that like button. Please share with friends. That really, really does help us out. And I will catch you guys in the next video.